Hi, I'm Bill from CJ Pony Parts. So far, the upgrades we've done from Total Control products have our 70 Mach 1 riding and handling really well. We've installed their coilover conversion kit, front sway bar kit, along with the export brace and the Monte Carlo bar. Today, we're going to finish off the upgrades to the front end of our Mach 1 by removing the factory power steering system and replacing it with this power rack and pinion conversion kit, also from Total Control products. This Total Control Products Power Rack and Pinion Kit is going to fit your 1967 through 1970 Mustang. It'll work on either a manual or original power steering car, and even make a version for a right-hand drive if so inclined. Everything needed for installation is going to be included, including the power steering pump, which you are going to want to use. It is not designed to work with your original style pump. Total Control put a lot of thought in the design of this kit to make it work as seamlessly as possible in your 67 through 70 Mustang. One of the things that makes this kit really nice is it retains the correct geometry. What it does is it replaces where the factory center link is going to mount, so there's no issues with bumps there, unlike a lot of other kits that are going to bolt down too low. By mounting it up high, it also provides proper ground clearance. By keeping the gear really close to the frame rail, you've got plenty of header clearance as well. This is going to replace the factory cross member, which will make it a lot more rigid and make the front of the car a lot tighter. It also is going to duplicate your original steering travel, so the factory 6 3/8, the tires will turn the same amount, so you're not going to lose any kind of your steering turn at all. Like I mentioned earlier, this particular kit's going to be designed for your 67 through 70 Mustang or Cougar with an FE engine or big block. Small block kits in different years are also available. We're not going to do our standard tool list for this installation because depending on your vehicle and previous modifications, you'll need different tools than we use more than likely. What you will need is definitely a good mechanics tool set and a few specialty tools as well. What I suggest is watch this video through to the end, get an idea of what you need before you get started. Just like with the suspension install, the first step is going to be remove all the factory components. Power steering pump, power steering lines, control valve, slave cylinder brackets, all that stuff is going to be removed before we begin the installation. Before you do so though, take a quick measurement from the outside of this end to the other side. That way we have a rough idea of what the toe is going to be, so we'll get the other components on the car, make it easier to drive to get it aligned. We're going to start by disconnecting the hose fittings down here where the bracket is and get some of the fluid out of the system. At that point, you can actually start disconnecting the control valve and slave cylinder from the brackets, and a lot of that stuff can come off as one piece. The hose are disconnected, we'll pop the bracket off. We're going to move over to the driver's side now, disconnect the slave cylinder. I'll move on to the tie rod ends. And now we're going to remove the castle nut from the pitman arm. Now we're going to remove the idle arm assembly from the frame rail. While we're down here now, we're going to remove the 3 bolts that hold the steering box to the frame, then move up to the engine bay and work on the power steering pump. Now we're up in the engine bay, we're going to remove the power steering pump and bracket. Start by loosening this top bolt and loosen the lower one, which allows us to take tension off the belt and remove the belt. Pump out of the way, we can go back now and remove the rest of the bracket. Now we're going to work on removing the steering box. To do that, we have to separate the rag joint, and then we're actually going to remove the steering column as well, which is part of the installation. We're showing you the rag joint here because once I get my arms in there, honestly, you're not going to be able to see it on camera. So there's 2 bolts and nuts, one on each side, so make sure the column is unlocked so you can turn it. You also at this point want to make sure your battery is disconnected because the key has to be on to turn the column. The next step in the process is going to remove the steering column itself to give us more room to work, plus we have to modify it later. First thing you'll want to do is remove the plate on the firewall by removing the clamp and the 4 bolts. After that, remove the lower steering column trim, remove the bracket, disconnect the turn signal switch, and finally remove the column. Once you have the column out of the car, you can come underneath here and remove the actual steering box itself. Depending on your application, this part can be very easy or probably quite time consuming. If you have an automatic with stock manifolds, it'll probably fall right out. In our case, with our long tube headers and our manual transmission, it's going to be a little more involved to get it out. We're not going to bore you with the details of this part, so do what you have to do to remove this, and then you can begin the actual installation. The steering rack mounts are going to mount to the lower control arm bolts here and the factory location for this cross member. So we have to remove these bolts and remove the cross member. I should mention the centric eliminators we already have installed. The steering rack is going to include these, which you'll install with the bolts to hold the rack in place. We already have them here since our car came with them with the coilover kit. We're going to put the bracket up into place so we can loosely put in our rack. Basically put the centric eliminator back into place where it was. And so the hard on the side, we're just going to snug it down for now. And do the same thing on the passenger side. Now we're going to mount the third bracket over here in the factory hole for the factory cross member, right on the passenger side frame rail. We're ready to test fit the actual rack itself, and we can see all these have to be the same height. Looking at this one, just you can tell, even pushed all the way up here, this one is still too high. So we're going to install one of the shims to bring it down a little bit. Now with everything up here mounted but loose, we can put the rack up into place. You will need help with this part because of the way of the rack. You'll want two people to get it up in place, get it aligned, and bolt it in. We're going to make sure the tube sits flush with each of these half circles. If it's off, you may have to go back and reshim or move things around. I'm going to put the shims in this side, then bolt this in next. The rack mounted, now we're going to prepare the column to put back in the car with our new components so we can connect our column to our rack and pinion. The first thing you got to do is hammer out the original steering shaft. We're going to put a pair of pliers on there, hammer that out this way. At that point, we're going to remove the plastic sleeve, make a few more modifications, and install the new steering shaft. This next modification is going to be for a 70 Mustang only. The column tube at the end has to be hammered flat with the main tube. Now we'll install the new shaft. I'm going to put the bearing retainer on the end here. And what you'll need to do is tap it with a hammer to get to the retainer is actually over the tube itself. And to make sure everything moves smoothly when you're finished. Now we're going to drill 3 holes in the column and secure these with screws. We're going to remove the old firewall seal. Our column's ready to go back in the car. Now we're ready to work on the steering shaft between our column and our rack and pinion kit. It's going to come with these two U-joints here. Basically, you're going to have one like this. So go here, and one end's going to connect to the column, the other one's going to connect to the actual rack and pinion itself. What we have to do first is put both of the U-joints in place, and then measure this distance from here to here so we can cut this to fit. Start by putting the U-joint on the rack side first. And get it on approximately an inch. So basically what you want to do is just cover the splines. What you want to do is get it tight enough just so it doesn't move. The second one gets connected on the column side. Now you want to measure so we can cut the steering shaft. What you're going to do is measure from the edge of this curve here to the edge of the curve down here, and that's going to be your cut length. We're looking at 5 1/4. Now we'll measure 5 1/4 on the shaft so we can cut it. You want to err to the longer side. Add a little bit of extra to the 5 1/4. You can always make it shorter, but you're not going to be able to make it longer. And that's where we're going to cut. What you want to do is loosen the set screws now and move everything as far up the shaft and down the shaft as you can so we can put it on our intermediate shaft. The shaft of the upper joint. Make sure the screws are loose because it has to slide all the way up into it or it won't be able to fit into the bottom. Once all the set screws are tight, now you want to go up top, turn the steering wheel from lock to lock, make sure everything moves smoothly and doesn't bind up. With the rack now connected to the column, you can finish the final torque specs for the brackets holding the rack to the car itself. You're going to start with the driver inner, then the passenger inner, then the driver outer, and the passenger outer. The first thing you want to do is just make sure they're nice and snug. Then you want to work your way through them and torque them to spec, which is 60 foot-pound for the inner brackets, 75 foot-pound for the outers. Once you're done that, just give a final snug to all the clamps as well. Make sure these bolts are also tight. The rack mounted, we can move on to the power steering pump. Basically what you're going to do is use the bracket here with the supplied hardware and these spacers to bolt to the front of the cylinder head. You have to add shims to get the belt to line up. Simply remove these and put the shims between the two aluminum spacers. I'll put the pump down into place with supplied hardware. With the pump and bracket mounted, now we can figure out what length belt we're going to need to make everything work properly. What we're going to do is use a piece of string, wrap it around everything, and then take a measurement. Make sure the bracket's on the looser side so you're going for a minimum measurement for now. Okay, laid on our table, our measurement's just over 41 inches. We're going to find a belt somewhere in that neighborhood. We'll try 41 first and see if that works. Once you get the correct measurement and figure out the right size belt, you have to pull your alternator belt off, then install this, pull off from the bolt below, tighten everything down, reinstall the alternator belt, and then we can move on to the power steering hoses. The line's going to go from the rack down here, basically down along the oil pan and then up to our actual power steering pump. The line they give you, basically the length is perfect just to cut it in half and go from there. The hose cut, now we can assemble the fittings. What you want to start by doing is unthreading the fitting from here with a piece of brass. And this, you go over the line. And this brass piece is going to go in here. Basically, it's going to go between the actual stainless steel outer and the Teflon inner. Force that down until it's flush. I'll spray a little bit of lubricant on this. Push that in the tube. Hang that back up. And get a wrench and tighten it down. And repeat the process with the other 3 ends. Now we're going to connect our stainless steel lines to the rack itself and then fish them up to our pump and tank in the engine bay. What I'm doing here is I labeled just one of them. They are specific on where they go. Pump and tank are labeled on the rack. When you get the lines up in the engine bay, you might forget. So what I'm going to do is make sure the green one, remember that's my pump connection. I'll make the connections on the pump and then on the reservoir. Now we're ready to fill the system, but to do that, we actually have to take the belt back off. That way we can turn the pump by hand to prime it. Now we're going to turn the steering wheel a few times to get some bubbles out of the system before starting the car and making sure everything works like it's supposed to before we start working on the tie rod ends. Now that we tested the system and got the air off, we can put the cap on, start working on the tie rod ends. Now we're ready to assemble our inner tie rod ends along with our bump steer kit. You're going to want to use the 67 through 69 style tie rod ends. These are actually not included with the kit. It's designed to use your originals, but in our case having a 70, we have to get a set of these. They're very inexpensive compared to what we're doing with this kit here. You're going to connect this to your bump steer kit and use these tie rod adapters. These are going to connect the inner tie rod to our center link on our power steering rack. We're going to start with a left-hand thread jam nut onto our inner tie rod. I'm going to thread this down pretty much almost the way to the bottom. And grab the sleeve. Going to thread left hand as well. Get this about halfway down. Now we'll put the jam nut on the rod end. And thread that in to the middle piece here. Get about halfway. We're going to make adjustments once it's on the car. Make sure the sleeve is nice and loose and moves freely. I can assemble the end of the bump steer kit. There's specific spacers included with the kit. You may not need all of them. It depends on your application. We're going to put everything on now. If to change it, we'll change it later. Put these 2 spacers on first. Put it through our rod end. And the other spacer, and we're going to put the smaller spacers on. And find the lock nut with the nylon insert. And then we'll tighten this whole assembly down. And it's ready to go on the car. Before we install the tie rod ends in our bumper kit, I'm going to talk about the center link plate here on our steering rack. Eagle-eyed viewers are probably going to notice this plate has changed since last time you saw this car. The reason we changed this, originally we ordered the big block kit from Total Control for our car. Being that it's a 351 Cleveland always kind of falls in the middle. Some parts use the big block parts, sometimes it uses small block parts. With the big block kit, we actually had some clearance issues with the tie rod ends hitting our headers. By switching over to the small block center link along with the small block brackets, kind of lifted everything up a little bit and gave us the clearance we needed. Start by installing the adapter included with the kit for the tie rod end. Put that in place and install the tie rod. We're just going to get it finger tight for now. We'll go back and tighten it up later. Now we're just going to get the spindle, basically eye it up, get it as straight as possible. Bring this over here and see how it lines up. Install the washer and the top nut and tighten it down. And we'll repeat the process on the other side, then we'll start taking some measurements. Now, if you remember when we started this, we took a measurement from the center to the center of the stock steering setup. What we're going to do now is measure this one the same way, from center to center, see where we're at. We started off at 46.5, we're actually at 46, so we'll make a couple small adjustments. That'll get us good enough to drive it to the local alignment shop and have it professionally aligned. Now what you want to do is turn the steering from lock to lock. Just make sure everything works smoothly. Make sure nothing touches, nothing's rubbing. And then once we actually have this out properly, we can get in there and tighten those bolts down as well. All right, Kyle, go ahead. Give me one rotation in either direction here. Plenty of room there, plenty of room there. Direction. Okay, now bring it back to the other side here. Keep going. A little more. All right, probably stop right there. If you have to, you can remove the center link from the rack to get behind there to tighten up the nuts for the inner tie rods. Okay, at this point, if you're using new inner tie rods like we are, you want to grease these up. And what you want to do is start the vehicle, turn it full lock to lock, check for leaks, make sure everything's good, and your installation's finished. Steer back and forth for me. Okay, other way. All right, one more time. Okay, back the other way. All right, straighten her out. The Total Control Products Power Rack and Pinion Conversion Kit we just installed is going to work beautifully with the front suspension we previously installed, make this car a lot more fun to drive. The steering is going to be a lot more responsive. Best of all, it's going to be a lot more reliable in the factory style system. As far as installation time, you definitely want to get some help for this install. It's going to be pretty time consuming, so give yourself the better part of a weekend. But take your time, and before you know it, you'll be back on the road.